at this point in the day, I want to thank everybody for sticking the day out. As I said in the beginning of the day, the audience is a critical component of DAS. There's a lot of talented and very smart folks in the room, as we've seen through questions and comments. So I'd like to just open it up for a few minutes to get thoughts. I'm sure, we've heard a lot of stuff today. I'm sure it sparked some ideas. Maybe you have not said something that you've been dying to say, or some insights into the day's topics and subjects. I just want to open it up and see if there were any thoughts.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carmel Curtis. I work with Brooklyn Academy of Music. I thought today was really great and really, I got a lot of useful information. I was just wondering if there was any consideration in the planning of this or in future digital asset symposiums I'd be really interested in seeing some case studies that give examples from like community archives or maybe some organizations or institutions with potentially less resources in terms of money or staff and like a lot of the things that were talked about today, I took a lot of notes, but I don't know how much I can take back to my institution. And I would be interested in seeing some examples of case studies, both successes or struggles that are from smaller organizations.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And in the past we have had those. I think one that stands out in my mind is the Democracy Now! A few years ago gave a presentation on what they were doing, and I think, extremely impressive stuff on a very lean budget. But absolutely, I think that's an important thing. But any other thoughts on that? Maybe hear from the group. Yeah, well, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Let's go.
So there's obviously been a growing talk in these circles of using ontologies both as a principle and a technology. And one of the things I would frankly love to see more of is and who's the English guy from schema.org? Like he might be a good one to speak to this among others that I know, but where all of this linking ontologies together theoretically takes us out there someday. Because obviously those of us who kind of understand in a sense what the technology can do, it's fascinating. And there's kind of this talk of, it's useful to use these things called triples, and there's talk of, and someday it would be awfully cool if we could link these things up on the internet and take over the world. But it would be fun to see, I think, a more academic or futurist kind of presentation on, what does the semantic web and semantic technologies actually start to allow for, which I think could be a good impetus in getting people to potentially consider adopting them.
Yeah, I'm curious if anybody in the room has any responses to that. You want to offer some insights? Yes.
The challenges are going to be companies like Rovi and ITER and all that. If you look at what Rovi's plans are for ITER, they're going to give you a subset that they're going to basically charge you for. So that's going to be the biggest challenge. We may have this group of words, but certain companies are going to hold this all out. And ITER is a good example. It's a good step forward, but talking to my previous clients, they were like, well, who's going to put the data in? Do we hire someone to put that in?
If you're looking for an example of, an academic example of RDF triples, you can go to linkedjazz.org. There's a little example there of what it can do.
Hi, I'm Pam Fisher of the Media Institute. Just one quick response to yours. Rovi is sometimes putting that in. Look at the ITV catalogue from the UK. It's all been entered by Rovi incorrectly, almost 80%, but there you go. I just wanted to comment on your point as well. I think some of these bringing schemes together work is going on. If you look, for example, at there's some work from the Copyright Hub and work that the BBC is doing. a guy called Mo McRoberts there has a massive open source, GitHub collection online of things, but bringing together things from a lot of the different ISO standards to go across schemas. But I do think more is needed as well, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Lorena Ramirez Lopez Carl, right? Hi. Kind of bringing everything together, like talking about IDER back to community archives. When I was dealing with IDER, I wasn't a member. So the documentation they gave for free online was completely different what they gave to actual members. So if we want to try to link everything together, but we're getting different information, we're not linking anything. And so these companies that can afford IDER are going to be doing it one way, which is still incorrect, versus the communities that are going to be reading the free documentation, which if I want to become a member, I'm going to be reading too, that no one's going to be linking anything correctly. So it's like, I don't know. I think that was more of a comment. But
Thanks. Hi, I'm Catherine Gronsmell. I'm from Carnegie Hall, and I think that one of the things that's linking together a lot of these conversations about limited resources is the funding sources, especially in academic environments or in nonprofits. And if your projects or your initiatives are based off of grants or temporary funding or just a large generous gift, it's really difficult to also include in that the policy that's necessary to make these sustainable aspects of whatever your mission is. And I think that this not only affects the logistics of what you can accomplish, but also for things like linked data. Carnegie Hall has been working, basically one person in the archives has taken it upon himself to create RDF triples, over 1 million of them alone. And the only way forward realistically is on a project basis. So basically having something that's kind of cool sounding to other people and then using the linked open data to make that happen. So that's kind of where the value added is for other people, for us to be able to move it forward. So it's, from my perspective, it all goes back to funding, because if you have funding for these less sexy initiatives around metadata from an academic or nonprofit perspective, you have more opportunity to go farther with it. And I realize this is kind of a departure from some of the media companies, but I think this is really important for us, and a lot of what happens in the commercial sector either trickles down or trickles sideways into academia and into nonprofits. So we're keeping an eye on you, but we're not quite there yet, and so we're trying to get our voices heard in this community, which is why DAS, I think, is so great, because it gives us all an opportunity to have these conversations as opposed to other places where we're even more marginalized in talking about this.
Thank you, Catherine, for the comment. Is that, for those that are in commercial entities, is that true, or do you find yourself easily finding resources for things like linked data projects, or is that, no? Or tell us what it's really like.
No, thanks for the comments, and I've been writing them down too, because I think they really help me understand DAS, which you've done a great job at today, and I really appreciate all the feedback. But yeah, I was just thinking about how all day long about structured data, no matter whether it's an ontology, a triple, a good metadata schema, whatever it is clearly, I think everybody in this room would agree, is a good idea. But it's difficult to actually get that. I was struck listening to you, Nick, earlier, which was a lot. No, I'm sorry. No, but you were talking about the lack of logging tools. Do you remember, like, way back in like 1997 or 8 or something? The logging tools were everywhere in some of the digital asset management softwares that were out there. They were like, that was the key, and then they just dried up. And it seems that's sort of the issue, is what is the value of metadata? I've heard some people talk about how someday metadata should become as much of an intellectual property object as the asset, don't know if you've thought about that over there, Greg. Have you thought about that? I bet you have. So, maybe that is something that gives it value, or, there'll be a super IMDb that, queries over women's rugby and Jamaican stuff and things like that. And so that will be a value to the metadata that's used in that, and they'll pay for it. I think that seems like where we're sort of on the verge of. But yeah, I think the fact that it doesn't right now have that much value is why, no matter whether you're Carnegie Hall or Paramount, getting people to do really significant, good cataloging, to use an old library science term, but just that, what it is, authenticate that object, make sure the provenance is right, get the right information in there, which is so critical. That is always hard to find money for, no matter who you are, even though everybody in this room would say, that's so great if you do. Is that, yeah?
So I'll be fast, I swear. Just occurs to me that I went from the land of sports. Tab and I have known each other for years. I was at the UFC for many years. He, of course, was with baseball. So we've had this logging metadata conversation back and forth forever. But recently, I've been working in the fun land of nonprofits. So the money scenario and the business objectives are, of course, very, 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 very different. One of the things that I took from sports that has applied well to performing arts, I'll just throw it out there, is before somebody does own all the metadata, I like to, what they call in web world, scrape data from all kinds of different sources and places and essentially federate or match up things. And I can fill in a lot of holes that way. So specifically, one of the projects I'm working on is a performing arts project. So there's lots of information out there on this thing called Swan Lake. I just lost my mind. And there's lots of people that have talked about it, and they've all talked about it in different ways. There's lots of different productions, and there's lots of different people and musicians and dancers and on and on and on. So there's already lots of information out there that so far people have not claimed to own, and you can start to be a little bit creative about where you can find data and pull it in. Scrape it, if you will, ask your IT guys for help on what that means, and pull that before you reinvent the wheel and sit in front of a terminal and retype in all this information. So I just bring that up as like, kind of get out of your own way and out of the box and go to your super technical guys, gals, there's a few of them, and ask them for, hey, what are some other more creative ways that I can get some of this data so I only have to fill in holes instead of recreating the whole wheel?
Yeah, just to answer your question, as far as is that true at a large media company, generally no, in my experience anyway. It has a lot to do with, to Nick's point, the business models that are already in place and the workflows that are already in place that have been for years and years. So when you take a process that's been geared toward linear distribution for 20, 30 years, and you suddenly go digital in the span of like a couple of years, those linear processes just transfer over because they have to get the digital content out right now. And now the rest of us are all playing catch up. And so as a result, the company's focus is always on the bottom line, right? You have to make money, you have to produce your content, you have to get it out to consumers. And those of us who are kind of in between going, okay, wait, but what about metadata? That's not the company's highest priority because that's not what they do. So the answer is not really. We're always evangelizing. We're always trying to get funding for what we're doing. And if we don't have the budget ourselves, we do appeal to our tech folks actually a lot, but they're very, very, very busy people. And our technology groups are often very focused on, we have to get things out on the air and we have to create HBO Now. And in all of the rest of that really good metadata work kind of has to come after the fact because those products are the focus.
Thank you. I would say building on that and shifting to the nonprofit world, I think that points to something that Isabel's talk was a good example of, which is being patient and being flexible and compromising. I recently started working at MoMA 6 months ago, establishing their electronic records archive, and this doesn't have to do with semantics or ontologies or anything, but echoing the same way that formerly sort of linear workflows for production have switched over to digital workflows now. Everything's operating in the same way, and now I'm coming in and telling people to try and change some things that they're doing, and it's going to take time, and you have to show people the benefits and why this helps out. And I think Isabel's incremental approach to that was like, now 5 years down the road, it's starting to finally get traction. And I think that's very important to think about. We all want to sort of turn around and like take hold of great new things like ontologies and OTT or whatever, and it might take a little while.
I mean, I could probably get away without that. And on that point, I mean, the thing that I've observed is, especially with rich media data, which
We are recording this, so maybe you do want to use the mic.
so it takes up more space, right? And as such, a lot of these automation and database technologies has come to our world almost last. So, another thing I think our world could stand to benefit from is frankly evaluate how other industries that had to adopt database and software automation technologies handled their own change management, because essentially every other industry already did it. And ours is really, in my opinion, one of the last. I mean, you couldn't send a package through any postal or FedEx or whatever without extraordinarily complex metadata database and software automation platforms doing a million different things. So it's not like these aren't solved problems, and I think we all as a community would probably do well to also look outward a bit and not just internally, because again, all of these change management issues that are really all about software technology and automation technology, other people have had these challenges and gotten through it okay.
Yeah, that's true. I ran into a funny scenario the other week where I had realized it came full circle when I was talking to a financial firm who said, well, what's the Library of Congress doing? We'll do whatever they do. And then you talk to the Library of Congress, and they say, well, financial firms are doing this, so let's do whatever they do. And they say, and then, government says, let's look to law enforcement. They know, and law enforcement says, let's look to the studios in Hollywood. They know what they're doing. It's like everybody's saying, like, yeah, the other people have figured out this problem.
Interesting that you used the financial analogy. I actually did come out of the financial before I was working in digital asset management and before I came to the Smithsonian. So a lot of the things that I learned in managing financial databases and flowing money are things that I sort of applied when I was building our repository. So a lot of the checks and balances and the security aspects and the redundancy and the tracking. So yeah, you're right. There are other companies, other industries that have been doing this type of work with these technologies for quite a long time, and they track to they're not even talking pennies. They're talking fractions of pennies, because when you have a lot of them, that turns into lots of money. So think outside of the box and look to other things that you may think are not applicable, but they're being done.
Thanks, Isabel. And one final comment.
Oh, and the last word. I just wanted to echo the same sentiment that Isabel and Nick were just saying. If you go to a conference for, let's say, master data management, where these enormous enterprises are managing their metadata, what they're not calling it metadata, their whatever their data is, across global infrastructure and people all over the world. Their retail, their finance, their telco, they're not media and entertainment. So they're definitely not archives, but they're doing it, and they have very different incentives. Each one of those industries has a different incentive. Some of it's regulation, some of it's financial, some of it's risk management, insurance or whatever. So they're doing that stuff, and it's a no-brainer to them that there is a need to manage your data and do it at an enterprise level. And I think when I look at those kinds of conversations, it brings back to this, and the data they're managing is, you know, as to us, the metadata that we need to power something like an OTT network. So, you know, I agree that there's a lot of we can learn from these other industries. And, you know, you talk to big banks and they're running their entire infrastructure on graph databases, and because it's fast and they can get down to the fraction of the penny, and it's pretty cool. So I think we can, you know, maybe bring in a bank next time.
Okay.
Next DAS.
All right. We'll get community archiving and a bank. That's what we'll do. And maybe we can connect them. They can. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna hand it over to Andrea to make some closing comments. Before I do that, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody. Thanks to our sponsors again, who we couldn't do this without. Thanks to Scandia House. Thanks to our speakers, and thanks to the audience. It's been a wonderful day of really diverse presentations and perspectives, and I know I've been really inspired and excited by it. So I hope you have too.
Thanks to Chris, everyone, please, a round of applause. Fantastic, fantastic day. I know how hard you worked. I appreciate it. And Laura and Beverly for being in the background and making sure this all worked well. Really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope if you've never been to an AMIA event before, this is your first one, that you will become a member and experience more and more events like this in your future. Because it was so gratifying to hear today when people said what I like about this is that we get to talk in here and speak to each other. Because that's what we're all about, this open forum concept. It's been there for 25 years and counting, part of AMIA. So please continue to join our organization and help us be great, because you did today. Thanks a lot.